Hello and welcome to the Partly Political Broadcast, the comedy politics podcast that always asks, but where are you really from? When someone says they found it via Spotify, because I've seen the stats and I know that's not true. I'm Tiernan Douieb, and as Minister without portfolio, because he'd probably lose it, and Chris Simpson's artist drawing, Nadhim Zahawi, says it's unfair for strikes to disrupt people's lives at Christmas, I agree. Those workers could be far more considerate and just do it by making eating unaffordable and heating their horses with taxpayers' money. It's that most wonderful time of year. Yes, that exciting time where Christmas lights bring dread as everyone wonders how much they'll increase the energy bill by, and children delight in handing their parents present wish lists featuring Lurpak butter, and could maybe this year be the year that Father Christmas helps MPs understand how the online safety bill actually makes the internet less safe? Oh, so sweet. And of course, it's the time when everyone all over the world is absolutely knackered and just wants to hibernate, their brains only being able to focus on that week in between everything where you forget what time it is and it's absolutely allowed to sleep solidly for 7 days straight without anyone worrying about you. During this festive season, it is important that we remember that the government and indeed all MPs are people too. Well, I mean mostly. The jury's still out on Marc Francois, who many suspect is at least part rock troll. But the rest of them, even if they don't act like it, are people as well. And that's why when they make appearances on television shows or outside Downing Street, you know that their brains have also checked out, possibly way before December or even the last December or the one before that. Nadhim Zahawi, for example, has been operating on Christmas season levels of brain activity for, well, likely most of his life, but particularly in winter, which is clearly why he gets all his tax calculations wrong and ends up sending them offshore by accident. Oops! And so, in this season for giving, we should have the understanding that when he talks out loud, there's probably very few lights on behind all his eyes as his brain computes the possibility of cuddling up with his warm horses in his taxpayer-heated stables. Zahawi has now been in so many government positions for only 5 to 10 minutes at a time at most that when he's thrown into primetime television interviews, he likely has very little idea of which department he's meant to be representing. Is he there for the government or that oil company he worked for ages while also an MP? Probably because, being an endlessly slimy man, he was the perfect mascot for them. Why are women talking to me, he might think, forgetting that he's on national television and not at one of the many President Club events he used to frequent. If only he could snuggle right up in that toasty hay that we all pay to warm next to his favourite foals, then maybe Nadhim Zahawi could get enough rest to allow him to figure it all out and actually make sense when he wakes up around spring. Now is the wrong time for nurses and other workers to go on strike, the man whose appearances of a small face slowly sliding off an orange said on one of the many BBC politics programmes that's there mainly to let Conservatives see how much bullshit they can say in one go before the interviewer even bats an eyelid. Because it will just help Vladimir Putin divide the West. Yes, that's right, that's what Nadhim Zahawi said. The Russian president, and what it might look like if you entirely shaved a disgruntled shrew, is only insisting on continuing to wage a violent war on Ukraine because of the possibility the UK might increase workers' rights. If we stop paying nurses entirely in applause and instead in hard cash that they can use for food and warmth, what message are we sending then? I mean, hey Putin, you may as well send out the nukes. The critical care team at the Royal Wolverhampton didn't have to use the food bank once this week. One of them even said they were warm enough to feel the tips of all their fingers when they managed to spend their only 2 hours at home, so I reckon you may as well kick off against Poland next too. What is it about strikes that Zahawi thinks would be such an aid to the Russian leader's plans? Is it that right now Putin sees our government as progressively getting worse at all things human rights, and so in his mind, if that continues, we could be like a little Russia, a little Russian buddy, and therefore all his friends can start donating to the Conservative Party again, which would of course really benefit the country overall by giving us another £1.8 million media room that absolutely no one will use. These strikes, says Zahawi, are unfair at Christmas because unions are disrupting people's lives, and he should know, as his government have been considerate enough to do that all year round for over a decade. It's not fair to the taxpayers that taxpayers should go on strike because taxpayers aren't being paid enough money to, well, pay tax. How dare rail workers stop people travelling anywhere during a cost of living crisis when they can't afford to go anywhere in the first place and various rail lines have reduced service anyway? It is awful that all these postal workers aren't delivering all those presents no one can afford to buy, or all those nurses aren't going to be helping all those people that won't have appointments for another 2 years anyway due to massive NHS underfunding and understaffing. When will these people who are the taxpayers think about the goddamn taxpayers? If anyone can make a stand about this, it is Nadhim Zahawi, who HMRC have been investigating for quite a while now on account of him likely not paying his tax. He has, however, used taxpayers' money to heat his stables, and if there's no trains, then he might have to use one of those horses, and that could make it cold, and frankly, that is awful. This month has been coined by the very original press as the December of Discontent, which refers to the winter of discontent in 1978, when there were widespread strikes due to demands for better pay, because basically everything we do now is a reboot. That discontented cold time was in the midst of an energy supply crisis and high inflation. Oh, isn't it funny how times change and progress? Which led to then Prime Minister and owl Jim Callaghan and the Labour Party losing the election a few months later, as it turns out these sorts of things do not a popular government make. Now, of course, it is uncannily similar times, except for there potentially not being an election for absolutely fucking ages, and the government of Prime Minister and man who looks like someone made a face out of numbers, Rishi Sunak, being able to fill TV interviews with their most idiot officials, warning against it in case it turns out that going on strike is the exact formula that, I don't know, will cause a hellmouth to open up in Swansea or the giant under the Tower of London to arise and stomp over everything. The list of workers on strike or about to start is expanding at a rate that would make Omicron jealous. Rail workers, postal workers, nurses, teachers, driving instructors, baggage handlers, security staff, ambulance staff, university staff, firefighters, London bus drivers and more are all either on strike or planning it, which kind of makes it hard for critics to claim it's some sort of woke uprising, when it's far more that things are just so shit in this country. The rhyme Tinker Tailor Soldier Sailor sounds like you're just announcing who's fed up with it all this week. Actually, that's not accurate, because soldiers are still being picked as the ones to help out during these strikes, as nothing sounds more comforting than living somewhere an army driver may take your driving test and mark you down points for not using your car as a road blockage while they hide behind it for 36 hours as part of a stakeout. Still, I do enjoy the thought of military personnel being sent to investigate a mysterious package that it turns out another military officer delivered while on postman duty earlier that day. These strikes are popular though, with nearly all the polls showing the majority of the public supporting those taking action and blaming the government that it's happening in the first place. Ever in tune with what the people want and need, Rishi Sunak has put together a winter of discontent task force to tackle what they say is unnecessary action. I mean, and it is, right? Why won't these people just work twice as hard and starve to death at the same time? What is wrong with them? We know Sunak is taking this very seriously though, as he's put Salman Nigiri, but as a person, Oliver Dowden, in charge. So I'm sure he'll tackle people's genuine needs by saying phrases like painful woke psychodrama quite a lot before wetting himself and having to leave. The National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers said they would stop their pre-Christmas strikes if an agreement was made, but the Rail Delivery Group gave them the option of a small pay rise if they agreed to loads of things they specified they didn't want, and so they said no. There has of course been outrage at the RMT for this, when it should be at the RDJ who treat negotiations over conditions like they're a child swapping pogs in the playground. Okay, you give me all your shiny special ones, and in return I'll give you 4% of one of my pogs now, and 4% in a year's time if you let me kick you in the nads 3 times and then insult your mum. Luckily, Labour leader and an artist's impression of the silence you get when on hold and they haven't bothered playing any music, Keir Starmer, has been really upholding Labour's ethos as the Workers' Party. When asked if the RMT were right to reject the latest offer, he replied, "I'm not going to start saying one side is right, one side is wrong." Yes, perfect move, Starmer. That'll really help indicate to all voters that you are on their side if their side is being impaled on a fence, wishing they'd made a single meaningful decision in their life, instead of hoping if they close their eyes, the wind might carry them in the right direction. Labour just don't have to do anything yet though, as being as active as a beached whale has already won them the first by-election under Sunak's premiership. Labour got an increased majority in Chester, while the Conservatives' vote share dropped from 38.3% to just 22.4%, meaning Sue Pollard impersonator Sam Dixon is the area's new MP, after the last one had to resign following sexual misconduct allegations. Ah well, and just when they might be entering government where that sort of thing is allowed. Deputy Labour leader and Charlie Brown's crush, Angela Rayner, said Sunak had failed his first electoral test, which is true, but voter turnout was only 41.2%, down from the previous 71.7% in the 2019 general election. I know that was a general election, and this is a by-election, but really the actual winner was voter apathy, who's likely to do very well next time round too, if Labour keep insisting that their main policy is to just, exist, and hope everyone will be really impressed by that. Actually, the Labour Party have been pushing 2 big policies this week. One is their plan to charge VAT on private school fees and remove their charitable status, something that is long overdue on account of private schools really not being charities at all. I mean, can you even imagine celebrities queuing up to make videos saying, if you donate £20,000 a year, Eton can give all of its students their own hot tubs on top of promises they'll get to be Prime Minister when they grow up. Please, please, look into your wallets and help. Actually, I can imagine some celebrities doing that. I see you, Cumberbatch. I see you. It isn't enough, obviously. What Labour should be saying is that they'd scrap all private schools entirely, make education properly funded and available to everyone, and private school buildings could be used as places people learn wizarding skills, and absolutely nothing else. But it was enough to get Rishi Sunak to take the bait like the little fish in the little pond he is, and accuse Labour of starting a class war, as though there hasn't been one waging in the UK for about 600 years now already. It's like the proprietor of a taxidermy shop getting angry that someone in there tried to swat a fly as it's animal cruelty. The other of Labour's big policies is that they promised the biggest ever transfer of powers from Westminster to the British people. No, they're not going to stop blocking members from having a say on their own policies. Instead, though, they are going to abolish the House of Lords and replace it with an elected second chamber so that voters could not bother turning up to the polling stations for all those people too. Oh, I see, now they want to make a whole load of Lords unemployed, do they? Why do they hate workers so much? I, of course, joke. Very few Lords work, but I am slightly worried that Andrew Lloyd Webber won't have anywhere to hide when it's sunny outside, and that could cause him to disintegrate if he doesn't find a coffin quickly enough. We do need big changes in the UK, though, because the country has changed, right? It's evident. It's no longer a place someone like Royal Aide Lady Hussey can aggressively ask someone where they're really from again and again without getting the sack. Though I do hope someone will still get the chance to do that to her until she gives in and admits she's from a Roald Dahl book as the villain. Having also never heard of Lady Hussey until last week, where she accosted the head of the Sister Space charity, I'm very disappointed that she has a name like that, but she isn't a 90s rapper who used to do tunes with Foxy Brown and Lil' Kim. Still, now she's had to leave the palace, she's got even more time on her hands, and she could possibly give it a go. According to the results of the census, Britain is becoming ever more multicultural and less religious, which is great, though of course it has prompted racists to spout on about the Great Replacement theory coming true. The big problem for them, though, is if that means that they're the ones getting replaced, it just sounds like an even better idea. Never the one to miss an opportunity to be a bigot, decomposing zombie porg Nigel Farage managed to recongeal himself for long enough to attempt a political comeback by claiming that London, Birmingham and Manchester are now minority white cities, which actually wasn't what the data said at all. He said that they're majority still white, just not all white British, unless of course Nigel Farage only considers white British people as white, in which case he's less racist than we thought, being married to a German woman for all those years. He and various other Conservative commentators got very angry that the country is identifying as less Christian than it did 10 years ago, even though you'd have thought they'd be really happy, as that means there aren't as many who believe they should help a refugee have somewhere to stay at Christmas. Luckily for Frogface, but unfortunately for human rights, that is only partly a joke, as it was also revealed that the government's Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme to provide a safe home for those who aided the UK military and government in Afghanistan has so far only actually worked for 4 people in the last 11 months. Yes, the Conservatives have almost resettled more Prime Ministers in that time. The Home Office said the situation is complex and it presents us with significant challenges, by which they mean if they open up a safe route, then everyone will want one for seeking asylum properly, and they can't have that. Again, public opinion is way more favourable of immigration and helping those seek asylum than it was 10 years ago, but that still hasn't stopped the Tories planning tough new asylum laws, meaning a cap of 20,000 on how many it takes in from Ukraine, Syria and Afghanistan. So I suppose that means they really need to get a move on and admit 19,996 ASP. Meanwhile, the Online Safety Bill returns to Parliament this week, where MPs will debate how to protect children from internet harms best, so they can spend hours online looking at pictures of all the food they don't get to eat anymore. The bill, as it is, isn't bothering to regulate social media companies to take down harmful content, but instead it just threatens to ban encryption and breach a whole ton of privacy rights. Still, what could make our children safer than hackers knowing their date of birth and address and what they look like, right? I suppose making British people more susceptible to hackers and not allowing anyone into the country is just all part of the plan to thwart Putin, right? I mean, Russian agents won't bother to find all your details if it's far too easy, and if the UK actually embraces immigration and manages to grow its economy at all, then Putin may just personally go around punching everyone in Moldova, and then, we'll be in World War III before you know it. But it is only a few weeks till Christmas, and so I suppose to embrace the true spirit of the season, the government should at least give the country something that they've asked for, even if it just means telling Nadhim Zahawi not to get out of bed until some point in 2024. In other news, what happens when a Snoggy grows up, Ian Blackford has stepped down as the SNP leader in Westminster. He's denied it's because colleagues were plotting against him or due to his support of outie with glasses Patrick Grady, who was accused of sexual harassment. Instead, he said it was time for fresh leadership, as he probably felt a little bit shown up being there for 5 years, while the party opposite changed their leader every few months. The two contenders to take his place are serious baked beans Stephen Flynn and Rebecca front character Alison Thulis. Flynn says, as a working class politician who grew up with a disability, he would be a strong voice in Westminster, which to be fair is what you need to be heard over all the stupid fucking noises MPs make. Alison Thulis says she'll be a clear contrast from the two men shouting at each other across the dispatch box, because I guess she'll be a woman shouting from a more diagonal angle on account of where she'll sit. Former Health Secretary and What If You Crossed Ralph Wiggum with a Mekon, Matt Hancock, has returned from his time on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here to continue to ignore his constituents by now spending all his time promoting his book that absolutely no one asked for. In extracts that have been published in the Daily Mail, meaning there's even more reasons not to buy it, he has tried to defend the horrific COVID death toll he was, well, in part responsible for, pretty much responsible for, in his newly published diaries, by saying he was told that 820,000 could die. So that means by only letting 180,000 die, he was basically heroic, right? No, it's more like saying, I've been told speeding down residential roads all the time will kill people, so I've decided to only do 120 miles per hour on Thursdays and Sundays. He also put the blame on care workers for the deaths from COVID in care homes, as opposed to all his shitty policies that didn't protect them at all. On the plus side though, if care workers really do have that much power over their jobs, then maybe they should give themselves a pay rise and refuse to ever look after any of Matt Hancock's family, ever. What if Matt Perry had been addicted to formaldehyde and former MP for North Shropshire Owen Paterson has taken a case to the European Court despite previously calling for Britain to break free from it entirely? I mean, once they hear his pathetic attempts to defend breaching parliamentary standards by working as a lobbyist at the same time as being an MP, they may well give up and close down anyway in order to spend more time adequately face-palming about it. The House of Commons has been given a low hygiene rating by Westminster Council after mouse droppings were found in 19 different places. There are also concerns that as mice are often carriers of parasites, that's how most of the Conservatives ended up there as well. And lastly, in response to months of protests, the Iranian government deny they're disbanding the morality police, but that the law women must wear a hijab is under review. That is going to backfire for them though, because if they give it even 1 star, they'll be deemed as taking part in witchcraft, and that's forbidden in Islam. Have you checked out yet for Christmas? I don't mean stop working. I just mean, like mentally checked out. It hit, as you can probably tell. As you probably tell, I have from that intro. But it hit December the 1st last week, and my brain just decided it was the holidays. I mean, it's not. And for some awful reason, I still have to work and do the school run. But I don't really think we're going to improve as a country until we only work during daylight, which means over winter. 4 hours a day? Or more. I haven't really counted. It just feels dark all the time. I can see what you're thinking about that sort of daylight working hours, but in summer that might mean that we work more. But I think then what we do is we bring in daylight saving time, where we still only work 4 hours, and then we save the others for winter. And then in winter, when we realise we can't save time as we're not time lords, then we all give up and hibernate again. Who's voting for me in 2024? That's right, everyone. Although if the election is in winter, I probably wouldn't be able to campaign very well because I'd be too tired. So yes, sorry, it's a slightly sort of bitty intro there with some jokes that just don't really make sense. But the news is bitty and my brain is bitty. It does sort of feel like we might have a normal Christmas news time, doesn't it, this year? Where there isn't any. I've jinxed it now, haven't I? There's definitely going to be an election in that weird bit between Christmas and New Year's, isn't there? The Merineum. At least then, though, I suppose there'd be something to look forward to in 2023, or at least sort of not look backward to so much. I haven't worked it out yet. This is the last proper podcast of the year. I did have an interview lined up for next week's, but that person has eluded me. And so it'll just be a mini Just Jokes one as the last one for the year, as no one needs podcasts now, do they? Who needs podcasts in December? There's other stuff. You've got to hear Mariah Carey singing that You're the Only Thing She Wants for Christmas 400 times in a row. That's what everyone needs. So I've checked the listening stats, and really, you will start dropping off in December anyway. I fully understand. There's other things to do. So there'll be next week's show, and then I'll take a break till mid-January when there's stuff to complain about again. And of course, then it'll nearly be episode 300, for which I have nothing exciting planned. You're welcome. Of course, if you do have any ideas for anything exciting I should do with it, let me know. I have zero. Until then, thanks, for all the things, particularly everyone that got billed for the Patreon this week, which is always hugely appreciated. You, of course, can join that too for no rewards at patreon.com/parpolbro. I know I keep saying it Patreon, but I know it's Patreon in the UK, but like everyone, because it's an American site, it's all like Patreon. We've been through this before. I'm going to keep saying Patreon. Or you could just fling cash at me via the ko-fi.com/parpolbro too. But look, what I really want to ask this week is, where are you all lurking online now? Posting about this podcast on Twitter really doesn't work now. All the algos seem to mean that any link popped on a tweet just makes it disappear. And I'm kind of wondering where else to tell people this exists. Facebook is terrible unless, you pay Mark Zuckerberg so you can dress up as a giant carrot and shout about it in the metaverse. LinkedIn doesn't really promote things unless you kind of promote yourself and tell everyone you're giving it 117% and you learn how to be really productive by not being dead or something. Instagram's all pictures. This is audio. It doesn't quite work. Mastodon confuses me. No, I'm not going on TikTok. I'm too old and I don't want to have to brush my hair every day. So where do I tell people about this? Do I go back to handing out flyers in pubs? Should I ask you all to scrawl publicity for this show under tunnels and in subways? Any thoughts that are, of course, completely inexpensive, please let me know. The last interview of the year is with Phil Lindsey at 4 Day Week, talking about a campaign for, 4 day weeks, and sadly not quite just working in daylight hours, but it's close, isn't it? Sort of close. Baby steps. It's all about the baby steps. The big problem with the government's notion that they want to get everyone into work is that everyone I meet doesn't actually like working. I mean, why are people so eager for the weekend if work is so damn great? Why does everyone always want to go on holiday? Isn't the utopian ideal that no one ever works again? As we've got robots that will do it all for us while we engage in wholesome activities like trolling people online and swearing at pigeons. Politicians have, for years, told us about these mysterious hard-working families that exist somewhere in their fevered imaginations, where presumably every member of the family is so devoid of happiness that even the children and elderly grandparents are opting to slog a 9 to 5 rather than attempt to actually enjoy life. The world has changed so much since the idea of work began that it does seem kind of silly we're still conforming to this idea that we have to do the same hours on the same days of the week, even though it's been proven time and time again that flexible working and fewer hours boosts quality of life and productivity. But then I guess, what sort of place would Britain be if we were happy and efficient? What next? Before you know it, we're all speaking German, right? And, several other languages, as we'd have time to learn them instead of replying to emails with, "You've CC'd the whole office about your need to take sick leave due to genital warts again, Tony. Please stop it." And anyway, if jobs aren't paying well enough to eat or heat your homes when you're working all hours of the week, we should probably all be questioning if it's worth it at all. If our country's representatives set an example, then they only work, like a handful of weeks a year, very rarely on a Friday, and the last Prime Minister was on holiday so much you'd think he actually worked for TripAdvisor. So isn't it time to follow suit with the way the future is going and all work less too? So say I, a self-employed type who works 7 days a week. But hey, it's not work if you do what you love, is it? So really, I only do 1 day a week because, geez, this podcast is a slog. Am I right? This week's interview isn't so much dwelling on the government being awful like useful, but more a hopeful way that things could be. In an alternate universe where stuff like that sometimes happens. I spoke to Phil Lindsey at the 4 Day a Week campaign about just why it makes sense for all of us to work less. Because the campaign hopes to appeal to everyone everywhere. I mean, who wouldn't like the idea of endless 3-day weekends forevermore? We don't delve into political failures or issues so much as talk about the campaign and how it could be implemented, and indeed has been lots already. I asked Phil why now is the time for fewer working hours, if it's going to be easy to do now we're knee-deep into a recession, and how we persuade politicians who don't do much work already to perhaps do slightly more work with a 4-day week. Okay, not the last one. But as is tradition, I've tried to end the year's interviews on a slightly more positive note, so I do hope you enjoy. Oh, and I say societal changes when I actually mean working changes, and it's been bothering me ever since we recorded. So now it can bother you too. Here is Phil. Hi, Phil. I've got to. I said to you as a pre-recorded before we started recording that I am biased towards this. Even as a self-employed person, where I don't really have any day week, but I still think 4 day weeks has a brilliant idea, and I'm going to try not to go on about that as we talk and actually get information from you about why. But I'm very curious as to why now is the time that a 4 day week seems particularly prevalent. I was fascinated reading through your website about, the weekend was only invented, was it a century ago? We haven't always just had a 5 day week. And clearly the weekends worked for a while, maybe, I suppose. So why is it that now we should be only doing 4 days a week, and what are the benefits of that?
Yeah, great question. Basically, the marker of progress for any society, or at least one of the key ones, is, are you reducing the amount of work hours that the people in that society are doing? And over time, obviously, we've seen that. But where we're at the moment is that since the 80s, we've kind of stalled. So technology is increasing, automation is increasing, which means productivity is going up, but we're not being rewarded in terms of how much more free time we have. So that's sort of where we're at. You mentioned the 5-day week being 100 years old. It doesn't seem that long ago, maybe, but if we consider the kind of economy we had 100 years ago, things have completely changed. I mean, like, one of the biggest things going on 100 years ago was coal mining. It was one of the top professions to have. There's not so many coal miners around anymore. The economy has changed quite a bit. So we've got to kind of change the working week to reflect that. And then on the flip side, the 4-day week, a lot of companies have already got it in place and it's working. It's completely viable. We're not forcing this on businesses that could not do it. It absolutely can and is happening. And that's sort of why it's the time that we really push everyone to take it on board.
And I was going to say, this might be a slightly facetious question, but what's the reason for sort of 4 days? Why not a 2-day week? Why not? Is there a sort of a certain amount of time does that make sense for it to be that many hours a week? And are there specific benefits to it being? Is it 32 hours? Isn't it? I believe it would be.
Yes, 4-day weeks or 4-day week or 32 hours. And actually, when we talk about the 4-day week, mostly we're talking about the 100-80-100 model. Which is where you're paid 100% of a full-time salary for 80% of the time worked. And the idea is to maintain around 100% productivity. And that's why we go for the 4-day week as opposed to, say, the 2-day week, because we can actually achieve that on the whole. Hopefully one day in a 2-day week, you'll be able to still do 100% productivity. Maybe we'll get there bit by bit. But for the moment, I think, these changes have to happen gradually, and the 4-day week is the right thing for right now.
Yeah, I mean, also, as I said, I was being facetious. I'm very aware that, people do like working, and that 4 days is sort of good amount of time before you burn yourself out, need a bit of a break, recharge you back. That seems to make a lot of sense just from how we work as people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're finding. It's also, like, when we're talking about the benefits of it. That's one of the benefits, is that you get a massive reduction in burnout. People are able to keep doing great work for much longer periods of time. In a 5-day week, what we have at the moment is that you've got a lot of sickness absences, whether that's through illnesses or any mental health issues. And what we see with the 4-day week is that massively reduces those sickness absences. And so that's one of the many sort of benefits that you'd have as a business.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Look, I've just created a set of infographics that detail 100 benefits of a 4-day week. I'm not going to throw all of those at right now. But I would like to rattle through some, if that's okay, just kind of break into different categories. So I've already started talking about business. So one, let's carry on with that. As well as reducing your sickness absences, you can have better retention of staff. It's a no-brainer. People are going to want to stay at a company that has a working week that suits their life. You're actually going to see productivity increases per hour because people are better rested, so they're better switched on whilst they're at work. You may even see, and we have seen this in our 4-day week trial that we're running in the UK at the moment. You may see productivity increase generally. So actually, people are doing more work in a shorter amount of time just by having that more rest and more time to do other things. It's pretty good. Quality of work increases. Morale, again, another no-brainer. Morale is going to improve if people have more leisure time. And actually, so talking about the trial that we've been running, so this is a trial that we started in June. It's going to be running until early next year. And this is where we had about 70 companies take on the 4-day week, and we're sort of measuring how suitable it is for those different companies and yeah, sort of measuring happiness of workers, productivity, all sorts of things. But we did a midpoint survey, and what we've been told is that 86% of the people who got back to us, they've already decided they're keeping it. So they were,
wow.
but they're like, this is absolutely working for us. It's changed everything. We're carrying on with it. So that's hopefully where we'll keep going with it as we go. So that's business. Right. Economy, generally, bigger picture stuff. 4-day week. It's good for the high street because people have more time to do things. They've got a 3-day weekend, essentially. They're not doing online orders. They're going out to their local businesses. So it's great for that. We also find that people tend to spend less money on material goods and more on services. So it's going to be good for tourism. It's going to be good for hospitality, things like that. If we're looking at sort of what's going on in other countries in terms of working hours and productivity, you've got countries like Norway and Denmark who they work some of the lowest hours in Europe, but they've got amongst the highest productivity. And I'm sad to say, over in the UK, we work we work more than most of the other countries in Europe, and our productivity, it's not in the toilet, but it's low compared to what you would think. So actually, we should be trying to be more like Norway and Denmark, working less and producing more.
I mean, that's definitely a motto I think a lot of people would like to live by. I mean, it's amazing when you're talking about the trial and the amount of companies that have stuck with it. But were there quite a few companies that were already doing a 4-day week before that? And are you noticing kind of business pushing ahead with this anyway? I'm guessing, we'll get to kind of the political side of this in a minute, but this does really feel like companies must be noticing the difference it makes and the benefit to them for doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, companies have been taking it on in dribs and drabs. You've got companies like Kickstarter and Buffer, which are big tech companies that work a 4-day week. But yeah, we're seeing basically a massive uptick in the last year of companies coming to us and saying like, look, how do we make this move and sort of reaping the benefits? We've recently had Atom Bank have started working a 4-day week, and they've done tons of work on like making sure that they're doing right by their employees, but also by their customers, and all the results are good. Customer satisfaction is up, employee morale is up, revenue is up. Yeah, basically people are trying it out and they're going like, why weren't we doing this before? Why weren't we doing this sooner?
Do you think because obviously one of the things that has made a massive difference to working in the last couple of years was the pandemic, where suddenly everyone went, I'm talking to you on Zoom, which I wouldn't have done even, a couple of years ago when I was still calling people on Skype for these interviews, which is terrible. But, Zoom's changed things, working from home's changed things, people kind of kept more local, people don't want to travel as much. Has that been probably one that, like a really big push towards the 4-day week campaign being successful, or do you think we'd have kind of got here anyway because of some of the societal changes you mentioned earlier?
I think you're absolutely right. I think the pandemic turbocharged it, basically, with everyone from working from home. Absolutely. Work became a lot more flexible. And also, look, we all kind of had all this free time, but we also had this realization that life is short, and that actually, we enjoyed having that bit more time maybe to spend with each other, with our loved ones, choosing what we got to do with our time. And that we'd like more of that whilst it's there. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. The pandemic gave it a real boost, and that's sort of what we've seen going forward.
But I suppose, as you said earlier, there's more automation. There's sort of other changes in work that are happening that would have meant we'd probably have got here eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's not a lot of positives to take from the pandemic, but it did give us a slight boost.
Sure. We'll take the ones we get. Yeah, that's fair. That's very
100%. Like, we've got to take the joy where it is, and that is the joy to be had is that, yes, you're right. It was already on the move. It should be happening. Now we're really, everyone's sort of desperate to make it happen, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that's fine. I will take that one. That's fair. So I suppose the big question, we're talking at a time, in fact, the week that we're speaking, there's currently a postal strike, and there's teacher strike in Scotland, and there's rail strikes. It's a big week of strike. There's a lot of issues with working rights and pay not being good enough to reach inflation, and at the same time we've got a 2-year recession where the argument's constantly that people have to work more and they can't be paid more because that would cause inflation. That's the political sort of rhetoric about it. Does all that make arguing for a 4-day week much harder when, and I don't mean in the detail, because obviously you've explained detail and how brilliant it sounds, but just in the simple saying it sounds like we're working 1 day a week less in a time when we've all got to be earning more and working harder.
It's a completely valid question, but the answer is no. It's still a very easy argument to make, and that's largely because we're in a recession. You're a business owner. Your employees. You would love to reward them with a massive pay rise, but the money that you're taking in is not what it could be, and you cannot offer them the pay rise they deserve. What you can offer them is a 4-day week. Okay, so you offer them a 4-day week. They're working less. They're happier. Their financial outgoings are likely to be improved on a 4-day week. Obviously, you're talking about things like childcare going down, commuting costs going down. So there's lots of financial benefits to the employee. But you as an employer are expecting about the same productivity. So it's sort of a win for everyone during a recession when maybe the true pay rise that employees deserve isn't the option for every company.
Sure, that's how companies will see it, which is very sensible. We sort of mentioned earlier that obviously I think probably private industry will be driving this more, but how is it sort of been taken by press, politicians? Because it is a big change. As you said, 100 years ago the weekend came in. We are quite used to that 5-day a week structure now. Do you think there's going to be hurdles in just, I suppose, getting us to think differently?
Yeah, I mean, so, politicians, obviously, they're motivated by their principles and their ideologies, but a huge thing they're motivated by is voters and what their constituents think. And look, if they're the ones pushing for a 4-day week, then they're gonna sit up and listen. And so that's how we'll move them. I think you move the private sector maybe first, or you move businesses first, and that's how you move things politically. So I think that's what we'll see. I mean, we're already seeing some gains there. We had recently Peter Dowd, the Labour MP for Bootle, put in a bill for a 32-hour working week, so changing the maximum working hours to 32 hours, which is essentially the 4-day week that we're campaigning for. And he had a lot of support for that from other Labour MPs. So it's there, it's in the air. We've made those first steps in politically, and so. Looking forward, I think we're going to continue to sort of push for that. And basically, anyone out there listening, if you support the 4-day week, write to your MP, tell them you support a 4-day week, and tell them why. And that's how we'll sort of push this forward.
I mean, the other thing you could do, of course, if you could get there to be a sort of royal celebration every weekend of the year, then we'd end up with a 4-day week anyway, and that would be great.
Absolutely. Let's have a bank holiday every single week. And then
yeah, that's it. That's it. It's interesting. It's just that sort of, as I say, in the framing of it, bank holidays, great. And but I suppose I haven't seen negativity towards the idea of a 4-day week, and I can't imagine there is, because who doesn't want to work a bit less? That sounds amazing. But it is, again, that framing of bank holiday is one thing. We're working 1 day less. It sounds different. But it's great that you're already getting some support. And has there been, you said that was with Labour, do you think there's any sort of movement from the government towards fewer working hours, or is that to come, hopefully?
You would hope so. I mean, basically, our premise as the part of the 4-day week campaign is that we've gone out there and we've done the research, and we're doing the trials at the moment, and there are trials going on all over the world. But essentially, the idea is that we have enough evidence to put in front of these politicians to say, look, it works. Why not go for it? There's no reason not to go for it. Make it seem like, it's an offer that they can't refuse, shouldn't be able to refuse. Who knows? But yeah, that's the idea.
Yeah, I mean, they're only in Parliament 4 days a week. I mean, they do work on Fridays in constituency offices, but I'm just saying there feels like there's an argument there. What about unions? I'm guessing this again seems to be like something that unions would support, especially with a want for more flexible hours for workers. Have you had a lot of union support for this?
Well, so, we were talking earlier about how 100 years ago we got the weekend, and a lot of that was down to union pressure. We wouldn't have the working week that we do now without unions supporting the drive for a shorter working week. So definitely we need them on board. We encourage them to be on board. We've got a few instances of unions starting to take it on board. There's Education in Scotland, who are the largest Scottish teachers union, and they've got it on their roster of things to campaign for. So it is out there. But yeah, we definitely encourage union support and welcome it, and we'll do more to get it and help us to win the 4-day week.
And I suppose this is what I'm curious. I have to say, I'm curious because as we've spoken about it, and as I said, I'm biased towards this. But have you had any resistance? Has there been anyone that's against this idea?
There are some. There is some resistance. Shockingly little, if I can be frank. You kind of expect more pushback, but actually, like I say, because we've done the research and we've done the trials, there's a lot of evidence to show it works. That means that there's not a lot to push back on. But you have some interesting people who actually want things to go in the other direction. I think Christopher Chope the other day was arguing that we need to get rid of working time directives, and companies should be able to make people work for as long as they need to work, and should be doing 70-hour weeks. And there is that pushback, but it flies in the face of all the evidence, and you just kind of feel with people like that you could put anything in front of them. You could absolutely prove it to the hilt, and they still wouldn't support it because they're kind of set in their idea of how work should work.
Well, Phil, listen, it's fascinating, and as I said, it's quite hard to talk to you without just agreeing with all of this, because why wouldn't you? I'm gonna be honest. As a self-employed person, the only thing I don't like is that there'll be one day less a week when I can go to the shops and no one will be there, and that's normally what I like. But that's fine. I'll deal with it. But how do people support this? Because obviously, as you said, companies are taking it up, which is brilliant. Politicians are slowly getting to. But how do we help this kind of gather momentum? How do listeners show that this is definitely something that we would like?
Yeah, so look, we've got a website, 4dayweek.co.uk. That's a 4 as in the number as opposed to the word. And we've got tons of resources on there that people can access. What we need is people to learn the arguments for a 4-day week. We need them to go away and talk to their friends, talk to their colleagues, most importantly, so that then they can go to their boss and say, look, here's the case for the 4-day week. Let's try it out. So that's one thing that people can do that would be huge. Obviously, follow us on social media. That'd be great as well. We're at 4day_week on Twitter and 4-day week campaign on Instagram. So just to keep up with what we're doing on there, that'd be great. And also what we'd love is if you run a business and you're interested, even just a little bit in the 4-day week, get in touch with us. And we can give you advice, we can give you guidance, we can help you set up a trial. And look, if you love it, we can get you onto our accreditation scheme, whereby we give you a bit of a boost on social media and shout about how great your company is. So there's all these lovely things. In fact, we just hit 100 accredited companies. That we'll probably just release that maybe a week before this podcast comes out. So there's a little scoop for you there. But yeah, those are ways that people can help.
Cool, that's very exciting. Brilliant. And listen, the question that I ask all the interviews on this podcast with the sort of hope of furthering good information, which is that apart from yourself and the 4-day week campaign, what other writers, campaign sites would you recommend that listeners check out for, I suppose, the politics of flexible working?
Yeah, absolutely. So we would recommend that you check out Pregnant Then Screwed. Is what they're called. And they're doing a lot of good work to end the motherhood penalty, the idea that when you become a mother, a lot of things become more difficult, a lot of barriers are thrown up. And one of those major barriers is flexible working, the need for it and the lack of it. And so they're really good to follow for that. We'd also suggest following Autonomy, They're an independent research group that we work quite closely with, and actually we've used a lot of their studies to sort of prove that the 4-day week is viable. In fact, their 4-day week, their study that they did in Iceland is a landmark in terms of showing what the 4-day week is capable of and the impact that it can have. So definitely follow Autonomy. Also, the Women's Budget Group and New Economic Forum, they're also great as well.
Thanks to Phil for that chat. Do get on board with the 4-day week campaign, especially if you are part of a workplace that might be susceptible to join up. Even more so if you are a sentient workplace that listens to this show somehow. You can find them at 4dayweek.co.uk, and as Phil said, on all of the socials too, including TikTok, because they are way, way more relevant than I am. That's possibly, maybe, likely, it is the last interview on the show for 2022, so who shall I talk to next year? Let me know your 2023 political flavours of choice, and I'll get sourcing words from such places. You can do that by dropping me a line on the @ParPolBro Twitter or Facebook, or via partlypoliticalbroadcast@gmail.com. And that's your lot for this week's Partly Political Broadcast. If you're a fan of the show, well then why not spread the word like it's an unhealthy butter alternative to all of those you know who might like it on their audio toast. If you can afford to, please donate to the Ko-fi or Patreon, and also give the show a nice sparkly review at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the other places you can find podcasts in their natural habitat. Big thanks to Acast, My Brother the Last Skeptic, and Cat Day. And this will be back next week when Nadhim Zahawi insists the NHS is aiding Putin by being operational, and if we all just died of our injuries, then there's no way he can divide us. Bye. This week's show was sponsored by Shamdemic Diaries from Matt Hancock, available next to the loo roll in all supermarkets from this week. Featuring incredible insights to his time as health secretary, such as, "It was when I asked my friend who ran my local, do you fancy getting loads of money to supply important things that you have no concept of how to do? And he said, yeah, it'd be a laugh, innit? That I knew it'd be okay." And, "It was seeing those death tolls go up and up that Mini-Matt rose up and up too, and I said to Gina, I'm going to have to bonk you right now in the photocopy room, as nothing makes me want to create life like so many losing theirs." Shamdemic Diaries, costing around 180,000 lives at all good retailers.